Hey folks, if these ice-cold tales of betrayal and payback are hitting you hard, smash that subscribe button, turn on notifications, and let's keep the revenge train rolling. Dive in with me. My wife's father invited me to a business dinner with a Japanese client. I kept quiet and pretended I didn't understand a word of Japanese. That was the first brick in the wall I would build around him. The dinner was held in late November at Lisbon's most exclusive sushi restaurant in the Parque das Nações. All sleek lines and soft lighting reflecting off the Tagus River outside the floor-to-ceiling windows. The air smelled of yuzu and money. Seated around the low lacquered table were Hiroshi Tanaka, executive director of a Tokyo-based renewable energy conglomerate. His two silent assistants, my father-in-law Antonio Mendes and me, Diogo Silva, the quiet son-in-law who only speaks Portuguese and a little broken English. Antonio had built Mendes Energia from a small solar panel installer in the Alentejo 20 years ago into one of Portugal's biggest players. He was 65, tanned from golf in Val do Lobo, with the easy arrogance of a man who believed charm and a firm handshake could buy anything. His daughter, my wife Leonor, adored him blindly. I had once too, back when he welcomed the broke architecture graduate who fell in love with his only child. That was before I discovered what he really was. Leonor and I married 8 years ago in a lavish ceremony at his quinta near Evora, cork oaks and olive groves, stretching to the horizon under a merciless July sun. He paid for everything, of course. "Family takes care of family," he said, pressing the keys to a new apartment in Lapa into my hand. I should have heard the chain in those words. 2 years ago, while renovating our weekend house in Comporta, I found a box of old letters hidden behind a false panel in the attic. They were addressed to my mother, written in a trembling hand I recognized as my father's. He had died when I was 12, bankrupt and broken after a business deal went sour. The letters begged my mother to leave Portugal, to take me far away from that snake Mendes. The deal that ruined him, a joint venture with Antonio Mendes that mysteriously collapsed the moment my father signed over his patents for wave energy converters. Antonio walked away with the technology, rebranded it, and built his empire on the bones of my family's future. My mother never told me. She died of cancer 3 years after Dad, whispering only "Be happy, Diogo" on her last day. I was 25, alone and clueless, until those letters. I said nothing. I smiled at family lunches in Cascais, kissed Antonio on both cheeks at Christmas, let him call me my boy while he bragged about his latest deals. Leonor noticed I grew quieter, but she was busy with her interior design firm and our 2 small children, Madalena and Tomás. "You're tired, amor," she'd say, stroking my hair. "Papa says the market is tough," Papa says. Tonight, Hiroshi Tanaka wanted to invest 50 million euros in a new offshore wind project off the coast of Viana do Castelo. Antonio needed a Portuguese partner with the right concessions. He had them because 15 years ago, he'd quietly bought the rights my father had once held, using shell companies in Madeira. I had spent the last 18 months learning Japanese in secret. Online tutors at 3 a.m., language exchanges in hidden corners of LX Factory, immersion podcasts while running along the beach in Caparica at dawn. I could now discuss contractual nuances, liability clauses, and bribery laws with native fluency. But at the table I bowed awkwardly, smiled blankly when addressed, and let Antonio translate everything badly. He exaggerated profits, minimized risks, and worst of all, promised Tanaka exclusive rights he didn't fully control. I watched Tanaka's eyes narrow slightly, the way Japanese executives do when they smell desperation. His assistants took meticulous notes. Over the final course of matcha ice cream, Antonio raised his sake cup. To a long and fruitful partnership, he toasted in clumsy English. Tanaka smiled politely and said nothing. 3 days later, Tanaka's office canceled the meeting scheduled to sign the term sheet. Antonio was furious. Some misunderstanding, he told Leonor over Sunday lunch at his villa in Sintra. The mist curling around the palace ruins like ghosts. The Japanese are so sensitive. I nodded sympathetically, passing him the Bafanas. That was only the opening move. I began feeding information, carefully, anonymously, to a journalist I knew at Publico. Old contracts, environmental impact studies that had been buried, bribes paid to local councils in the Alentejo for permits. Nothing illegal on my part. Everything was public record if you knew where to look. The journalist was hungry. Corruption in renewable energy was hot. At the same time, I rebuilt connections my father had lost. Former colleagues, engineers who remembered the wave energy theft, university researchers who still cited my father's early papers. Quietly, I registered a new company, Onda Azul, using a small inheritance from my mother I'd never touched. I hired 2 of the best young engineers from IST and began updating Dad's old patents, filing improvements just different enough to be new. Leonor noticed the late nights. "What's Onda Azul?" she asked one evening in our kitchen, the children asleep upstairs, the scent of her tomato and roasted pepper soup lingering. "Just a side project," I said, kissing her forehead, trying to feel useful. She smiled, trusting. That hurt worst of all. Spring arrived with wildflowers carpeting the Alentejo plains. Antonio's troubles grew. The Publico articles appeared. Questions were asked in Parliament. The Competition Authority opened an inquiry. Share price of Mendes Energia dipped. Banks got nervous. He started drinking more. The expensive whiskies he imported from Scotland. At family dinners, he snapped at Leonor, complained I was distant. She defended me, then cried in our bedroom afterwards. "He's under so much stress, Diogo, be kinder." I held her while she cried and felt the old rage settle deeper. The climax came in June at the annual Renewable Energy Conference in Porto. The venue overlooked the Douro, golden light on the water, delegates in linen suits sipping Douro whites. Antonio was keynote speaker, still the king, though his crown was slipping. I was there too, invited as family. Tanaka was in the audience. After Antonio's speech, full of bravado and outdated figures, I took the stage unannounced, invited by the organizers, who had quietly switched allegiance after seeing Onda Azul's new prototype data. I spoke in perfect Japanese first, thanking Tanaka-san for his patience and integrity. The room went still. Then I switched to Portuguese and English, laying out the history. My father's stolen patents, the offshore concessions built on fraud, the environmental corners cut. I projected documents, dates, signatures, including Antonio's. Leonor, seated in the front row beside her father, went pale as death. Antonio tried to interrupt. Security escorted him out. That night, the news broke nationwide. Mendes Energia shares plummeted. Prosecutors announced investigations. Antonio was barred from leaving the country. He came to our house 2 days later, unshaven, eyes red. The children were at school. Leonor let him in, trembling. In the living room, overlooking the garden heavy with jasmine, he fell to his knees. Diogo, please. I did what I had to. Your father was weak. He would have failed anyway. I gave you everything, the wedding, the apartment, my daughter. I looked at Leonore. Tears streamed down her face. You gave me nothing, I said quietly. You took my father's work, my mother's peace, my children's grandfather, who they will now know as a thief. Leonore whispered, Diogo, was this you? I met her eyes, every step. She slapped me, hard, then collapsed sobbing. Antonio was arrested a month later. Embezzlement, fraud, tax evasion. The villa in Sintra sold to pay debts. He ended up in a modest apartment in Almada, alone. Leonore filed for separation. The children stay with her, and I see them every day. She hasn't forgiven me, maybe never will. Some nights she looks at me like I'm the monster. But on quiet evenings I take Madalena and Tomas to Comporta, where Onda Azul's first prototype now spins cleanly in the Atlantic swell, generating power the way my father dreamed. The children run along the dunes, laughing, sand in their hair, and for a moment the weight lifts. Revenge tasted like ashes. At the end, I won everything I set out to take, and lost the warmth of the family I thought I had. On the beach at sunset, the sky bleeding orange and violet, I whisper to the waves the words my father never got to say. It's over. The ocean keeps turning, indifferent and eternal.